So let's take a look at Sichos HaRan Kuf Aleph, and the Rebbe says like this: Kfar mevur kama pa'amim. It has already been taught in Breslover teachings in Sichos HaRan a number of times, and we've learned pieces that were related to this idea. She'ein srichim shum chachmas ba'avodas habayri yizbarach. That a person does not need any sophistication when it comes to serving Hashem for real. Rak tmimus upshitos ve'emuna. Only what Rabbi Nachman refers to here as tmimus upshitos, simplicity, like a childlike innocence, ve'emuna, and faith. That's really what serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. And obviously there are so many opportunities when it comes to serving Hashem with all the mitzvahs and all the details to get very caught up on the technicalities, on the sophisticated elements of it, of whether it's the learning of the mitzvos or the doing of the mitzvos. And all of that might have its place, and all of that is important without a question. But Rabbi Nachman is saying over here that the essence of it is really mamish, just simplicity, tmimus upshitas, as basic as we can, just the most fundamental elements, like stripped down to the core of what tefillin is, of what Shabbos is. Of course, a person is supposed to, as best as they can, delve into the deeper meanings and understand just exactly the depth of what these mitzvahs contain. That's everything that we try to do in our learning together, and all the different shiurim is really trying to go beyond the surface. But we shouldn't forget that all of those things are there just to deepen the experience that is fundamentally simple, which is, I'm here to do the ratzon of Hashem. I'm here to align my spark of the divine, that's called myself, my identity, with its source, and to try to do so as consciously as possible. And this simplicity, even though, like we learned in previous teachings, Rabbi Nachman advised his students to learn the Kabbalistic intentions for tefillah. You remember we learned this in the past? Rabbi Nachman told his students to learn the Kisvei Harizal, the Kavanas, the Hari, to learn how to daven with all of the deepest metaphysical intentions in mind. But then the Rebbe said, when it comes time to actually daven, you don't need any of that. When it comes time to actually daven, just like a child, just the simple meaning of the words, try to put as much feeling as we can into it. Reb Nassan says in Likutei Halachas elsewhere that the truth is that when a person really comes to understand the depth of what Kabbalah and what all of the mysticism is trying to enable a person to understand, when they are engaged in this mitzvah or another mitzvah, whatever it is that a person is doing, that when a person really reaches the end of the road, Kabbalistically speaking, at that point you meet the simplest intention of every Jew. Just like at the end of the road, eventually you see that it's really aligned with like the most basic kavana of just like the world was created and there's a creator and we're trying to fortify our awareness of the creator. That's really the point. Now you can get really technical with it and very deep with it, and just in what way is there a creator who manifests his being in our world, right? And you can get super technical with it and understand that there are so many different avenues of the creator's expressing himself, and all of that is true, but at the end of the day, it's all trying to just get us into that basic awareness. And that's a very beautiful thing to understand. That at the end of the day, the kavana that all the greatest Kabbalists have are not detached from the intention that the simplest Jew has. It's just different layers of understanding. But fundamentally, don't get involved in the technicality of it, because that's not where it's at. Remember, again and again, the Baal Shem Tov is explaining, and all the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov are bringing us to this awareness that Rachmana Liba Boy, that the most important thing in serving God is not all of the sophisticated and Torah analysis and how good we feel about how complex our understanding of the mitzvahs are. That's beautiful and that's important, and we want to try to get as deep an understanding as we can, hopefully, to inspire the emotions in our heart. But that's not the ikr. That's not the essence. The essence is authenticity. a sincere, present awareness of doing it because we genuinely want to get close to Hashem. We genuinely want to live lives that are full of infinite value. Like to really do what it is that we came to this world to accomplish. That's it. And that's our intention. That's called Rachmana Libabai. Hashem wants our heart. Hashem doesn't want what you do. Hashem wants you, right? And He gave us a whole system of things to do because those are ways that we can show up. Those are ways where we can step out of the mundanity of our own lives, where there's millions of different considerations all relating to our this worldly identity, and we can enter into a realm where we would not be doing these things if Hashem hadn't given them to us as an opportunity to connect. Whether it's lighting Shabbos candles for the women, whether it's tefillin for the men, whether it's tefillah for every Jew, we wouldn't be doing these things. We would just be living life. So again, it's not about what we do, because Hashem is perfect and doesn't need it. It's about the fact that we bring ourselves into it with a genuine spirit of desire, of yearning, of a deep interest in fortifying our faith, so that we don't continue to be swayed by the illusion of this world that's trying to tell us that there's nothing other than what we see with our eyes, when we know that everything that we see with our eyes is just flowing forth from an infinite realm that we do not see with our eyes, but that any person with eyes of faith can see, can understand. We're immersed in divinity. We're swimming in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's revelation. And so that's what the mitzvahs are. So it's important to try to understand the depth, whether it's halachically, to understand very basically just what we're supposed to do and what the general underpinnings of the mitzvahs are. Right? So there's no pointless halachic speculation. It's all has a point. It's trying to clarify what are the boundaries of this mitzvah. At what point can we say this is no longer the mitzvah? Right? What are the definitive parameters for the mitzvah? That's halachic depth and understanding, and then all the spiritual understanding. We try to go as deep as we can to really ensure, and this is the key, that we have the deepest experience. But when it comes to the experience, it's just very simple. It's just very basic. I just want to serve Hashem. I just want to open the channel that exists between my heart and the heart of the world. That's it. And that's what Rabbi Nachman calls tmimus upshitas ve'emuna, simplicity and wholesomeness, without the arrogance of a person, bringing like themselves into it. It's not about us and how much we understand and how much we do. It's about how what we do understand and what we do fortifies this essential spirit of emunah. Va'amar, and Rabbi Nachman continued and said, Shepshitas hi gevoya min hakol. That not only is it the primary essence of serving God, but really in a certain sense, and this is the great paradox of spiritual journeying, that we want to get close to Hashem, and so we learn more and we daven more, and then in a certain way, you realize that maybe I was closer to God in a certain sense when I was just doing it out of a much simpler kind of sincerity. And that's why it's so crucial that we take the journey. I spoke about this on Sunday morning, when we had yesterday morning. We had our shiur in Keser Shem Tov. It's another series that we give during the week. It's on YouTube. Keser Shem Tov, that sure, we journey. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu set the world up in such a way that we should think that we're so far from Hashem that we want to get close, even though it's all an illusion. Because what do you mean you're far away? Ein oid movada. You cannot be far. He's with you. You are an embodiment of His image, and so on. But Hashem makes it so that we should feel that there's distance, because He wants us to journey. We're supposed to journey. We're supposed to learn more. We're supposed to get deeper understanding of serving God, and so on. But at the same time, let that not muddy the waters of what the essence of spiritual connection is really all about, which is this simplicity. And in a certain sense, those people who are really serving God, who for one reason or another, they haven't journeyed and they don't know so much. Well, the Baal Shem Tov would consider what they called the Tehillim Zuggers, those people who just sat in the back of the shul. Maybe they didn't know how to daven so well. Maybe they weren't the biggest Talmidei Chachamim. Maybe they didn't know how to read. But whatever they could do, they did fully. Whatever they could do, they did with all of their heart and soul. Says the Rebbe, well, if that's the essence of spiritual connection, and all of our sophisticated attempts at going deeper in our understanding of Torah is just to fortify that, so then don't forget that that's the pinnacle. Shepshitos hi gevoya min hakol. Simplicity is the highest madriga. Because again, what Hashem is after is not, that we should have a whole bookshelf in our head and sort of our body just like lugging around this really heavy head that's filled with books. That's not it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants our heart. And so those people who are heartful, even if they don't know so much, but they do whatever they do with full kavanah, full intention, and a sweetness of just faith and simplicity, says the Rebbe, make no mistake, that's Gevoya min hakol. And again, this was a very threatening message when the Baal Shem Tov began to speak this language, because there was like a sort of Jewish intellectual elite that felt that it was an affront to everything that they were and everything that they stood for, which of course it shouldn't have been, because hopefully all of their intellectualism was supposed to also just bring them to a state of pshitos. But the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Nachman after him, all the tzaddikim, meant to reveal this point, that in all of our sophistication, let's not take our eye off the ball. Let's not lose the plot. That the main thing is pshitos, and that's what's the most precious to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A leiv nishbar v'nitke elikim lo yisiv zeh. A person who's really authentic, showing up with a real desire to grow, even as we're going to learn in a minute, with our challenges and our difficulties and our doubts and our pain. But you showed up, so that's already the highest. Like Chazal say, echad hamarbe ve'echad hamamit, whether a person does a lot or whether a person does the little bit that they're able, ubolvad sheyechavin libo lashamayim, as long as the person's whole heart is in it, because that's the main thing. I learned a Mishnah this morning, the Mishnah in the 4th parak of Rosh Hashanah, tells us that if a person just so happened to be walking past a shul on Rosh Hashanah when the Baal Tokeh is blowing the shofar, so then the Mishnah says that in kivein yatsa, if the person had kavanah to listen, so then he was yotzei. Ve'im lo kivein lo yatsa. But if he didn't have kavanah to fulfill the mitzvah of hearing the shofar, so then he did not fulfill his obligation, and he has to find somewhere else to listen to shofar more intentionally. And the Bartanura over there, the commentary which explains the Mishnah through the lens of the Gemara, right, because the Mishnah is just sort of condensed information, the Gemara fleshes it out. So he explains that you might have thought two things. Well, you might have thought that even if he did have intention, so then maybe he shouldn't be included in the intention of the Baal Tokeh, of the person who's blowing the shofar, to help everyone in shul fulfill their obligation, because he wasn't in the shul. He just happened to be passing by. So maybe you'd think that even if he did listen, but at the same time, the person blowing the shofar doesn't have him in mind. So it turns out, no, he does. Meaning we assume that the person who had in mind to help everyone who's hearing the shofar fulfill their obligation, that includes also a person who's just walking by. But the other point is that you might have also thought that maybe as long as your ears actually hear the sound of the shofar, who cares if you had intention to listen to it or not? Again, the point of listening to the shofar on the simple reading of the psukim is that the Jewish ear, an ear belonging to a Jewish person, should hear the sound of the shofar. Good, so he heard the sound of the shofar. And like to us, hopefully this sounds silly. Like, okay, fine. So your physical ear happened to hear it. What if the person was sleeping, so his ear heard it? I mean, obviously that's not what it is. And so the Mishnah reinforces this. In kivein libo yatsa. It's not just about doing the thing, so you checked it because your physical ears heard the sound of the shofar blast on Rosh Hashanah. That's not what the mitzvah is. In kivein libo, your heart has to be in it. The heart has to be in it. That's the main thing. So that's what Rabbi Nachman says, shepshitos hi gevoya min hakol. Whether a person does a lot, whether a person's only able to do a little, every person in accordance with their own journey and where they're at along the journey, as long as the person's heart is there, in this simple way, in this wholesome, innocent, humble way. That's the main thing. There's nothing higher than that. And he concludes this teaching, Ki Hashem Yisbarach Baruch Hu b'va'adai gavoya min hakol. Certainly there's nothing more elevated than God. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is what's called in the Zohar Kadosh, Ikra v'sharsha dekula almin. God is the essence and the root of all worlds, of all other, not other, but all strata of existence are all founded upon that fundamental essence. He's the root of being. From our perspective, anything that we experience as existing is rooted in the divine. So God is what's called, he's not like physically high, there's no, beyond space, so there's no up or down. But conceptually, God is gavoha min hakol, because he's first. And everything else is a result, so to speak, of Hashem's existing. He's the necessary extant. He's the mechuyev hametzius. He's all that actually fundamentally exists. That's what we mean when we say that Hashem is gavoya. He's high, right? He's lofty, elevated, because everything else is already less than, contingent upon all the levels above them until you get to Hashem, who's gavoya min hakol, v'hu yizbarach hu pashut betachlus hapshitus. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we know in and of himself, being absolutely one, is fundamentally contrary to complexity. There are no parts in God. There's just God. It's just simple. Now, for us to really wrap our minds around this quote-unquote simplicity, this unity, so God reveals different traits, different aspects, and the midah of chesed and gvura and tiferes and the sephiros and the elements and the worlds and all different metaphysical systems, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to enable us to understand what already exists as one, so to speak, within him. Begin, as the Zohar Kadosh says, for the purpose de'ishtim mod inlay. God wanted to make himself known, but himself is fundamentally simple. Right? We don't mean simple like it's basic, but simple in the sense that it has no separate parts. It just is. Says Rabbi Nachman, so here's the biggest proof that there's nothing higher than simplicity. Because God is the highest, and God is the most simple. And so when a person is able to embody simplicity, meaning there's not a part of them that's in shul while a part of them is not in shul, and the only reason that they came to shul is to satisfy this part of their identity, but there's some other part that has no interest in being there. That's already complexity, that's fragmentation. Part of you is here, part of you is not here. Part of you wants this, part of you wants something else. But to show up fully, that's called simple. It means I am completely present in this moment. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. And I'm not in it for any motivation other than to do the will of the divine. Like that's what life's about. That's why I'm here in the first place. There's nothing else to do. Really, there are other things that need to be done, but there's nothing really fundamentally else to do, in the sense that I was created for this. And I'm here fully, because how could I not be here fully in the context of the very thing that I was born for? Like, how could I not be there fully if that's why I am here with a capital H, like why I am alive in the first place? So that's the idea, says Rabbi Nachman, bring your whole self into serving God. You're davening, your whole self is there. You're doing a mitzvah, your whole self is there with all of your heart. And from that standpoint, it's the highest. Because God is the highest, and God is really fully there. Like, completely, all aspects included within God's simplicity. Okay, so that's his proof over here, that there's nothing higher than simplicity. Ki Hashem Yisbarach Baruch Hu b'va'adai gavoya min hakol, because there's nothing higher than God. V'hu Yisbarach pashut betachlis hapshitus, and God is absolutely, fundamentally simple, non-complex, non-sophisticated, just is, literally just is, fully, and is constantly fully present as the essence of all presence. Anything that exists, that's present, is only present, so to speak, through God, because God is present. And that's Sichos HaRan 101. I just 101 is like, because when you want to say something is simple, right? So you give like mechanics 101, right? It's like the most basic. So it's very beautiful. This is Sichos HaRan 101, right? This is Judaism 101. Is all about simplicity. This is a crash course in just how to be a Jew. 101 is just mamish simple, and that's really all there is. That's really all there is. Okay, let's take a look at Sichos HaRan 102, which is the next step, and is also part and parcel of our attempt at bringing all of ourselves, like we're learning, into Yiddishkeit. So listen to this. It's an amazing teaching. We're going to learn this, hopefully, and then we're going to take a look at a piece from Rav Kook, and then another teaching from Rabbi Nachman and Likutei Moharan that's related to this, all with Hashem's help, B'siyata D'Shmaya, and again, with tremendous, tremendous gratitude to all of you for being here. It's so wonderful to learn with you. Ashreinu, Ashreinu. Thank you for joining. Says Rabbi Nachman, Shamati, or says Rav Nassan actually, Shamati b'shmai, I heard in the name of Rabbi Nachman, Sichos HaRan Aleinu. Al Pasuk, commenting on the verse in Bamidbar, which is Bilam's prophecy, where he says, Loi hibit aven b'Yakov. God sees no iniquity, no sin in Yaakov, which is the Jewish nation, or more specifically, according to the Aptara, the Oyev Yisrael, he writes in his Sefer that actually every single Jew has a part within them that's called Yaakov, that's called Yisrael. And in that place, no sin ever touches. In relation to that place, any sin is completely external and cosmetic. It's just on the surface, you can wipe it clean. But it doesn't touch the essence of the Jew, which is literally, again, a chelek elokam imal, which is a spark of the divine, that has no connection at all in any way, shape, or form with quote-unquote sin or deviation from godliness. But be that as it may, says the Pasuk, Lehibit Aben b'Yakov, God sees no sin in Yaakov, v'lo ra amal b'Yisrael, and sees no iniquity in the Jewish nation. Hashem Elokav imai, Hashem, their God, his God, right? Because it's referring to Am Yisrael as a whole, is with him. Utruas melech boy, which is generally translated, if you look at Rashi, that the friendship of the king is boy, is within him. Utruas melech boy, like Laloshin Re'a, Leman achai v're'ai, for all of my brothers and friends, right? So Utruas comes from the word Re'a. So this entity called Yisrael, called Yaakov, has within it the friendship of the king. Says Rav Nassan, so I heard Rabbi Nachman had a whole idea about this, to explain this, but I forgot. And this is incredibly unique, by the way, among what would otherwise be considered hagiography, right? Which is basically when people really love their teachers or their spiritual masters so much that they just sort of fudge the truth a little bit and they make some stuff up and they make up miracle stories, and it's not trustworthy from a historical standpoint as a verifiable testimony, because this person, like a student, a disciple of a master, would have had every reason to fudge the facts and make things look much more shiny and much better than they actually were. And if you could say that about anybody, so it would be obvious to say that about Reb Nassan. A more dedicated student, be hard pressed to find somebody who was more dedicated to his teacher than Rabbi Nassan was, dedicated to Rabbi Nachman. But what gives us strength and conviction in believing that every word that Rabbi Nassan wrote was 1,000,000,000% true is because, and this again is unique in these kinds of dynamics, that again and again and again throughout the whole corpus of Breslov, 80% of which was written, maybe even more, it was written by Reb Nassan himself. Again and again and again, when he doesn't remember something, he tells you. When he isn't clear about something, he makes that clear. Remember, MS, truth, is such a fundamental Breslover, foundation that it's absolutely implausible that Reb Nosson, in the hope of preserving the greatness and conveying the greatness of his teacher, would make things up. So here's the humility of Reb Nosson saying, he's had something to say, but I don't remember what it was. But I just don't remember. And then he says, but I'll tell you what I do remember. But what I do remember is the following, the explanation that he gave for the end of the pasuk on the words Utruas Melech Boy, which again we translated as and the friendship of the king is with this nation, with Am Yisrael. So Rabbi Nachman learned that the word trua, maybe again literally here, means friendship, but Rabbi Nachman says, well, it means something else. Because the word utruas doesn't only connote friendship, it also connotes lashon shvira. It suggests brokenness. As the pasuk in Tehillim says, David davening to Hashem that Hashem should take retribution on the wicked. Tro'em b'shevet barzel, shatter them b'shevet barzel with an iron rod. The word tro'em in this context means to break, means to shatter. So Rabbi Nachman's reading the words utruas hainu kishem eshaber mesakfiris, when a Jew is able to shatter the thick veil of doubt, which is the Amalekian ice of Asher Karcha Baderech that comes to cool us off with all kinds of doubts. And when a person is able to take a sledgehammer to the ice of Amalek and shatter it, utruas azai melech bai, then you discover the truth that Amalek is trying to convince you to ignore, that you have the king inside of you. You have melech bai. You, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is literally the soul of your soul. And this idea that you're so distant from him, and this idea that Amalek wants to make you give up, that we've spoken about in the past, this idea that Amalek has every intention to convince the Jew to jump on that shevet dun, right? That final shevet of all the different shvatim that were traveling through the desert, the stragglers. That Amalek attacks the stragglers to try to convince them, you're finished, there's no hope, there's no purpose in carrying on. So utruas, when we find the strength to shatter those thoughts, and to remind ourselves of the truest truth, that we're pure and godly and divine, and we're created both on the level of our soul and therefore on the level of our body, in the literal image, so to speak, of God's revelation, the 10 spheros, and that whatever we have inside of us is because Kiviyachol God has inside of him, B'ni b'chayri Yisrael, and we're God's firstborn, and God takes so much pleasure in us and pride in us, no matter what's going on in our life, etc., etc. If we can shatter the kfiras, then a Jew comes to the realization, what you discover behind the veil of ice, that Melech Bai, Hashem is with you. Hashem was always with you. Hashem will always be with you. Melech Bai. Hainu, so that's one level. Now there's another degree of understanding this. Shem moitziin es hamelech yizbarach, real tshuva, as we're going to see in a minute, is the realization, and this is very, very deep. We're going to see from Rav Kook in a minute, but we'll see. Hainu shem moitziin es hamelech yizbarach, you can find HaKadosh Baruch Hu gam b'soich hakfiras atzman, in the very experience of doubt, from the standpoint of having come out of the tunnel into the light. The light is so incredibly brilliant that it's sufficient to enable a person to look back and look into the tunnel and to see that God was in the darkness too. Because if a person comes to do tshuva, and a person comes back to Hashem, and yet they still look back at those experiences of darkness, whether it was experiences of sin or a lack of emunah or whatever a person was dealing with, and they're not capable of saying that God was there too, They're not capable of being able to find the way that there was infinite value underlying that process and that it couldn't have happened any other way. So then that person hasn't actually come back to Hashem. Because what it means to return to Hashem means to return to Emunah. And our Emunah as Yidden is radically monotheistic, which means that there is no place in existence where a Jew can definitively point and say God is everywhere, but not there. On the contrary, our job as Jews is to say Gam Zu Litova, is to point at everything and say, not just generally speaking, Kol Mada Avad Rachmana L'Tava, that in theory everything that God does for the best. No, on a very specific level, you look at your life, you can say Gamzu, Gamzu, Gamzu. Everything is Latova because it's the story that God is telling, and we don't know what's good for us, and we don't know what our neshama needs, and we don't know what the world needs, and we don't know what kind of processes are necessary for us to go through to get where we need to get in ways that we never could have gotten there otherwise. That's real tshuva, right? That's real emunah. That's coming back to Hashem, but in such a full way that from the standpoint of the light at the end of the tunnel, you realize that the darkness of the tunnel was somehow also light. That the light of that the darkness of the tunnel was somehow also saturated with the presence of Hashem. Ki gam ba'hakfir is such a shocking line. Not just you telling me, okay, God is in challenges, even more radical, God is in sin, some way. But here you're telling me, and listen to these words, Ki gam ba'hakfiras ba'atzmon melubash chiyusei yisbarach. Because even in moments of heresy, even in atheism, even in doubting God, and not just doubting God, but denying God, somehow God is in that experience too. Because He's God. And our definition of God is literally everything. He is the Mekomo Shel Olam. He is the space within which anything that happens. And not just space like, okay, there's like a physical room, so then tons of stuff happen, but He is the space. No, the conceptual space. This that anything is able to exist exists by virtue of there being space around it for it to exist. And if there wasn't space, if you can imagine, like if that space was like deleted, then certainly that thing that is currently in that space would not be here. It would be, right? It would be completely destroyed along with the space that contained it. That's what we mean, says the Nefesh HaChaim in Shar Gimel, when we refer to Hashem as the Mekoimo Shel Olam. It isn't just He's the container and then everything happens inside of it. He is the foundation, the platform upon which every single aspect of life unfolds. And if every single aspect of life is unfolding, whatever that aspect might be, rest assured that God is there. Rest assured that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence may be discovered even there, because it's a thing that's happening. And if it's a thing that's happening, then it's God revealing Himself somehow, in some way, in some form. And so obviously it's going to take a lot of thought, like how do we understand this? So this goes back to the previous piece. Number one, Tmimus Pshitas, we just believe it. It's just true. That's what Hashem is. But then we want to also deepen that awareness, deepen that emunah. And so we're going to try to understand this on two different levels. Let's first take a look at Rav Kook. This teaching comes from a sefer by Rav Kook called Aris HaEmunah. And Rav Kook writes the following. It's I think a generally well-known piece. There are a few pieces like this in the writings of Rav Kook, where Rav Kook refers to heresy, to atheism. Says Rav Kook like this: Yesh kfira shehi kahida. There is a kind of atheism that's actually very deeply connected to faith. V'haida, and there's faith, right? Hoda means to admit, right? But there's an affirmation of the truth of Hashem, shehi kfira, that's actually like heresy. Ketzad. How do we understand this? An atheism that's actually emunah in disguise? Like, how does that work? Says Rav Kook, Sichos HaRan Aleinu, he was really the light of Rabbi Nachman. Rav Kook was really a spark of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. And he said that about himself, He said, Ich bin Reb Nachman. He said, I am Rabbi Nachman. I have a whole book sitting right there on my shelf about the connection between these two tzaddikim. So listen to Rav Kook. Moida Adam Shatari Himin Hashamayim. He says it could be that a person believes that there's a Hashem and Hashem gave the Torah. So a person has faith. He believes in the foundations of Yiddishkeit. He believes there's a Hashem, and he believes that Hashem chose one nation to be his beacon of light, to spread godliness, to spread faith, to spread divinity in the world, and he gave us a Torah to do that. But he says that person's conception of Shemayim and God and Torah are so incredibly twisted and so strange and so estranged from the actual fact of what God really is and what Torah really is and what Shemayim is, that we believe Torah min Shemayim. What is Shemayim? That there's really very little between that person's so-called faith and the truth of what the Torah is trying to convey. Because that person's conception of Hashem is so distorted and is so limited that in a certain sense, okay, so he says he believes, but the God that he believes in, so to speak, is incredibly distant from the true conception of Hashem. And so it's faith, but it's like heresy in a certain way, because it really has very little to do with faith. So now, if you flip the coin, or to the other side of the coin, is obviously the following. Ukfira shehika haida ketzad. So then how do we understand an atheism that's actually very deeply emunah oriented? He says it could be, and so we're seeing this again and again in our generation. I just sat this morning with somebody who's been on a journey, and this was his journey. For many years, this particular person, and I know a number of people like this, and I'm sure that you do too, was completely disconnected from faith. But not because this person was just like checking out and the person wanted to pursue, pure just physicality and ego and just, in a purely selfish, materialistic pursuit, decided that they couldn't hack this Shabbos thing. 90% of the time, that's not what it is. I would even go so far as to say much more than that, or so maybe say 99% of the time, maybe even 100% of the time. Much more frequently, it's the following. Kaifer Adam b'Torah min Hashemayim. He says, yes, the person appears to be kofar, just denying that Torah is from Shemayim. Avol kfirasim, you said this, but the only reason that the person is disconnected from Judaism is rak al oisak klita shekalat menatzir shel tzuras hashemayim asher b'moichas hamalei machshavos havel v'tayu. The reason the person's running away from Torah is not because they're running away from Torah. It's because these people have the same conception of Torah as the kofrim that we just mentioned earlier, who really believe that it turns out that their faith is a faith in a God that's so small and so unbelievable that these people run away from it. Because they know that there's got to be something deeper than this. And so they think that there's got to be something deeper than Torah. But what they don't realize is that the issue was not with Torah. The issue was their conception of what the Torah is or isn't. Their conception of what Hashem is or isn't. Their perception, their idea of what Shabbos was or wasn't. And so like Rav Weinberger says, the people running away from Shabbos, not running away from Shabbos, they're running away from a system of restriction that for no apparent reason prevents them from doing everything that they want to do. That's what they're running away from. And says Rav Kook, a Shabbos like that, like maybe it's fitting to, so to speak, to run away from a Shabbos like that, because that's not what Shabbos is. And sometimes people need to run away and take a long journey to then come back And like I like to say, and I told this beautiful soul this morning, he isn't coming back home. That would be a tremendous mistake, because he ran away for a good reason. So why would we want to come back home to that? So I say, you're coming forward home, not back home. It's home, but it's got to be different. Can't come back to Yiddishkeit, the same Judaism that we ran away from. You have to come back with so much more depth and so much more breadth, and obviously because there was a reason that our souls were not connecting to that. Not because we're bad and because we're horrible atheists, but because that concept of Judaism ought to be discarded. It ought to be reformed. Excuse the language, right? Not reformed, like reformed, yes, in the right way. So Rav Kook says, it's possible that a person is denying that Torah is min hashamayim, but the foundation of his kfira is miyusedes, is founded rak al oisa haklita, is founded on his perception shekalat min hatzir shel tzuras hashmayim asher b'moiches hamaleim b'mashavos hevel v'tayu, is just based on the perception of Judaism he gets from people whose minds are filled with hevel v'tayu, who's filled with every kind of limited, fragmented, small, myopic, and coarse Jewish concepts that choke instead of setting free. V'hu aimer, so the person says to himself, and again, it might not be on a conscious level, but subconsciously, what's actually happening inside of our youth who are running away. And I've spoken about this in the past. There's a shiur on YouTube called Spiritual Metamorphosis, I think it was, or just Metamorphosis, which is all about this idea. So their souls are saying very deeply that it must, the Torah's got to be deeper than this. This can't be where it's at. This is not why God came down on our Sinai, for this. It's got to be deeper. So adam, and so he starts to find and to seek broader pastures, not recognizing that what he's looking for is actually here, but just in the neshama of what's here. And instead, he doesn't realize that there's a body and a soul to Judaism. He sees the body and he says, well, that's not where it is. I'm going to try to look elsewhere. On the level of like going to the left or to the right, or to the north or to the east or the south or the west. What he doesn't realize is that, well, you do have to run away, but run in, because that's what you're looking for. Run in. And this is a radically different message, for, so to speak, struggling youth. We're so quick to want to just like bring them back, so to speak, bring them back to the system. And I think from the standpoint of maturity and from the standpoint of humility, what we should want is for them to grab us and drag us forward, because that's what they're after. Because the rejection of the Torah of today is not a rejection of Torah. It's a deep, deep yearning for the Torah of tomorrow. They just don't know it. And so they think that they're rejecting Torah. But what they're actually rejecting, so to speak, is their current understanding of Torah. And it's usually the one that they get from our society, which needs to change, which needs to grow. It needs to deepen. It needs to broaden. It needs to return to heart, to connection, instead of just remaining on the surface. So this is what's happening. It's specifically because of the exalted nature of this soul or these souls that they seek and they seek and they seek. So even though this particular person, Chas v'Shalom, is completely disconnected from Torah, from mitzvahs, from Shabbos, from tefillah, from anything, see, he hasn't gotten there yet. But says Rav Kook, Mikol Makom, and this is so important for parents to know. Hashem, we should only see, revealed nachas from our children. Some kids go through difficult times. And what parents need to know is not, one day your kid will be frum again. That's not the point. We don't want to just bring our kids back. That would be a waste of their journey. That would be a truncation, a truncating of the depth of what it was that stirred them to move. Because these souls, says Rav Kook, are so connected to what he calls oimek hamusar v'roim hachachma, even if it's happening on a sub-conscious level, a sub-spiritual level, even if it's coming from a place that on the surface level they just want to have fun. No, but it's much deeper. Mikol Makom, says Rav Kook, don't disregard it. Kvira zu kahida hi chashuva. This kind of atheism is the deepest kind of faith. It's coming from so deep inside of the neshama. It's not the Yetzer Hara. It's actually the Yetzer Tov, paradoxically. That's compelling the person to seek something else, and a lot of shattering of the old has to come about because of that. That person you can trust will go on their journey, but they will come back. And when they come back, they will bring all of us forward. Because they will have discovered a Yiddishkeit that their neshama was seeking all along. And I can tell you, in full disclosure, most of you know this already, this was mamish my journey. I was one of these kids from a pretty young age. I was like even 6th grade, year 6 already. Something was wrong. And I really wasn't able to put my finger on it, but something was wrong. There was something deeply troubling to me about not about like just Judaism generally, but about our communities, and about the focus, and about the tone, and so much that continues to pain me today about our opinions about the world, our opinions about the Umas Ha'olam, our opinions about each other, what our value systems were, the externalism, the externality of it, the shallowness, the judgmentalism, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And I know that sounds very judgy, I know, but sometimes you have to call out what ought to be called out without judgment, but just assessing. And I felt this so deeply. And I thought that meant that I had to discard it. And so for a number of years I did, in whatever way, my own personal journey. And then when I started to hear the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and particularly the teachings of Rabbi Nachman, it was obvious to me that this is what I was looking for all along. I wasn't running away. I was running to. I was running toward. But I really just wanted Hashem. I didn't want a system. I didn't want, just like a framework of do's and don'ts, and I wanted what the Torah was always supposed to be, which is a channel and a portal to a higher state of consciousness that enables a person to realize there's a Hashem in the world. And he's really real, and he really loves me. And that's it. That's the essence of it. And everything else is decidedly secondary, but we swapped what's primary for secondary with secondary for primary. So now, unfortunately, what matters is which shul do you daven in, and how do you label yourself? You're this chassid or that chassid, or what's your opinion on this or that? Everything having to do with olam hazeh and shallowness. But the real heart of the issue, the real engagement with Yiddishkeit as a spiritual odyssey, as an immersive spiritual experience, that was something I had to journey to find. And on the surface, to my parents, certainly, and to everybody else, it looked like I was running away. But I promise you, not for an instant was I running away. It was my neshama that was compelling me forward. Says Rav Kook, Mikol Makom Kfira Zu Kahida Hi Chashuva. This kind of atheism, and it might not look pretty on the surface, and it might take a long time for the process to resolve itself. And none of us daven for this lechatchila, that we daven that our children, Be'ezras Hashem, all of us should be able to avoid this long journey, and should have it already, to know that the treasure is in their backyard, and they don't have to journey all over the world. They should just go and dig it up, But when this process occurs, and it is occurring in children, in teenagers, and adults alike, says Rav Kook, don't be fooled. Kfira zu Kahidah hi chashuva. Oh, this is emunah. Because this is flowing forth from a deep, deep faith that there's got to be something deeper than the external facade of faith. That's emunah. And sometimes a deep emunah could look like a rejection of shallow emunah. This journey is the long short road, the derech arucha shikatzara. It might take a long time, but when it happens and when it clicks, and when these souls, like my soul and our souls, I think for many of us, discover what it is that we were searching for, it's paradise. And you see it immediately. It's like, this is what I was looking for all my life. People speaking this language, tzaddikim teaching these teachings, this concept of the divine. I mean, this is what I was after. It's the long road, but it's the short road. And it'll actually bring us closer to Hashem, even though on the surface it might take a long time. And it might look on the surface like we're moving further away. V'daratu puchais kazeh, says Rav Kook, this upside down generation, where it could be that there's something holier about the kids running away, the troubled kids, the struggling kids, the kids at risk. Maybe there's something holier about them than, in a certain sense, those that are sort of towing the line, that on the surface look like they're fitting into the system, and they're just, because it could be that they're just going on with emotions. They're just going along with things in a rote way, but their neshama isn't there. But we already established on the first piece that the whole thing is about the neshama, is about the heart. And so it could actually be, in some paradoxical, upside-down world, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has so much more nachas. And again, we don't wish this on anybody. It's a b'diavad, from our standpoint. This is not the lechatchila. We want to just have both. You can have both. You don't have to run away. We should have it here already. And our children should be brought up as Hashem. We should do our part to give this over to our children so that they don't need to run away, that they should have a Yiddishkeit of geula. They should have it already. But who knows whether HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have more nachas from those whose neshamas are so alive that they compel them to seek something deeper, even if that looks on the surface like a lapse of religiosity, and even though on the surface it looks like anger, and it looks like chutzpah, and it looks like every kind of rejection, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that that's the good stuff. That's a neshama that's active, and it's compelling the person forward, even though, again, on the surface it looks like they're moving backward. So says Rav Kook, V'dar tapuchais kazeh, this upside down kind of generation where up is down and down is up, hu nidrish kam kin l'mal yusa. There's a way, and of course Rav Kook was speaking about the secular Zionists, right, which Rav Kook felt there was something holy there, and the religious establishment couldn't understand what the man was talking about. How are you praising atheists? Because they didn't understand what faith is, so they didn't understand how you can find faith in atheism. Because to people who don't understand that emunah means mamish with all your heart and soul, it's impossible for them to understand what Rav Kook is talking about. And so they rejected him, just like the system and establishment rejected Rabbi Nachman, just like they rejected the Baal Shem Tov, just like they rejected the Ramchal, just like they rejected all up and up and up, back until essentially Yosef and his brothers. It's the same story. The same story. Because they couldn't understand him. But what Rav Kook was referring to was the spark of Kedusha that is sitting at the core of a generation at his time. We don't really understand what Judaism looked like. There was not one family that didn't have kids. We think today we're in a crisis. We don't understand what the world looked like before the Second World War, going back 100 years. Every ism in the world, communism, Marxism, social, all the different ism, Bundist, Zion, secular Zionism, every family we were hemorrhaging kids. And all the old guard establishment could do was kvetch about how terrible the youth is, and chutzpah yaski, and what a horrible low generation, and you read this Hadaras. And Rav Kook stood up, and Rav Kook said, you people don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what's going on. Because Rav Kook believed in Yiddishkeit. He believed in Hashem. And he believed in the Hashem whose sparks are found inside every single Jewish neshama, and he didn't write anybody off. And he said, no, it doesn't look like this on the surface, but there's something holy happening here. Because this generation, again, is not running away, they're running forward. And we need to listen to them and not demand that they continue to listen to us, so that one day we can turn them into us again, and then they'll be from again, they'll be from Jews. That's not the point, because we don't know what from Judaism is about. They need to teach us. They're the future leaders, and that's what Rav Kook's whole thing was: to empower, to strengthen, to encourage. And he was so misunderstood. He was so misunderstood. So misunderstood was he, that because he was rejected by the quote-unquote mainstream establishment, there needed to form around him, tragically, because he begged them not to do this, a Mizgaret, a community called Religious Zionism, Mizrahi, and they learn Rav Kook, and they like Rav Kook. And that itself is the biggest misunderstanding of Rav Kook, because Rav Kook was speaking to every single Jew. You don't have to wear kippah surga to learn Rav Kook. You don't have to be a Zionist to learn Rav Kook. You don't have to be in the army or wear sandals for that matter. Exhibit A. And you can't see, but I'm actually wearing shoes, believe it or not. And I don't actually serve in the IDF. And my opinions might not align with those of the religious Zionist community on every single aspect of the state, and so on. That's not the point. Rav Kook was speaking to the neshama of Knesset Yisrael. And that's why his opinions seemed so like radically different. But they weren't different. We became different. Those were the original thoughts that sat and that still sit at the core of what it means to be a Jew. And our generation is discovering that. What a privilege that our generation is discovering that. We get what he was talking about finally, because we've experienced that in our own lives. So we know what he meant. We know what he meant. And what a privilege that 130, 140 years ago, HaKadosh Baruch Hu already sent a neshama that was a Rav Kook. Kook means to look, means to see in Yiddish. Rev Avram Yitzchak HaKohen is Rosh Teva's Ra'aya. He was a seer, he was a visionary. And every word that he wrote is burning with relevance. And like everything, Hashem sets the world up so perfectly that it will only be accessible to people who are willing to look past whatever ideological baggage they have around what Rav Kook is. And do we learn Rav Kook and don't we learn Rav Kook? Forget it. It's oxygen. If you're still in that space, of needing to say, ideologically, does my particular community hold of Rav Kook? Forget hold of Rav Kook. MS is MS, understanding Karim Divrei MS. And the people that are not in that space anymore, people who don't care what they let you learn or not let you learn, because you're drowning and you're desperate for one word of truth, so then you've paid the price of admission. And this applies to Rav Kook, and it applies to Breslov, and it applies to Chabad in a certain sense, and back and back and back and back and back. That's it. So to the degree that we become Geula Jews, we have access to Geula Torah, and we're able to give our children Geula Torah, and we're able to bring this nation back to life. And that's our hope, and that's our dream, that's our vision, and that's our prayer, and that's our blessing. Should be zeichet to walk in the light of these tzaddikim, the light of Rabbi Nachman, Zchus Yagan Aleinu, the light of Rav Kook, the light of those who really understood what it means that Ein Shem Yish Ba'olam Klal, that there's no despair in the world at all, and that the core of this whole project of existence is holiness, is tshuva, that's driving the whole world forward. We should embrace them as just Hashem with humility and with yearning, to do our little part to channel this light of the Geula, not just for ourselves and our families, but for others, because everyone needs this. Everyone needs this. Ashreinu Matoich Lakenu. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll continue to journey together. And I'm really excited that it seems to be that we found a good time, Baruch Hashem, that really seems to work. So I'm so happy that more of the Chaver were able to join, and we have to stick together. We have to stick together. A light in the darkness. Chazak v'yamatz. Have the most wonderful, wonderful week up ahead. I would take questions, but I just have to jump off because we have a thing actually you can see on my wall. The Piasetzner Rebbe's yard site is tonight, and so we have a special event that I have to prepare for now. But let's let this settle, and we'll see each other next week. Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach. Thank you so much for joining. שכל כך אוהב אותי, האב שלי, מלך חי וקיים, על כל נשימה שאני נושם.